This is Transmission Interrupted, the podcast series from NETEC, the National Emerging Special Pathogens Training and Education Center. Welcome to Transmission Interrupted from NETEC.
Hello, and welcome to Transmission Interrupted. My name is Lauren Sauer, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and the director of the Special Pathogens Research Network. For those of you not yet familiar with NETEC, our mission is to set the gold standard for special pathogens preparedness and response across health systems in the U.S., with the goal of driving best practices, closing knowledge gaps, and developing innovative resources. NETEC works alongside and in cooperation with the CDC and is funded by ASPR, the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response. Joining me today as co-host is Ms. Rachel Lookadoo, a public health lawyer and assistant professor at UNMC with me. Hey, Rachel.
Hi, Lauren.
Rachel and I are coming together for the 5th episode in our series about pathogens in pop culture. Pathogens are everywhere, and we're going to bring you some of the best and brightest experts to get a reality check on what is science and what is fiction in some of our favorite pop culture media. On today's episode, we're branching out of movies, TV shows, and books, and talking board games with our very special guest, Matt Leacock. Matt Leacock has been designing board games since he was very young and full-time since 2014. He is best known as a designer of cooperative games, including Pandemic, Daybreak, and Forbidden Island. Pandemic, first published in 2008, has sold over 5 million copies worldwide and is available in over 30 languages. And his latest game, Daybreak, challenges players to stop climate change, something that is definitely near and dear to our hearts. He lives in Sunnyvale, California, and we're so thrilled to have him join us. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So I am very excited to talk board games with you. I love board games, and when Rachel and I were first discussing reaching out to you, we thought the first question we wanted to ask is, how did you get into creating tabletop games? It's such a very specific job. And to be able to do it full-time since 2014 is amazing. So could you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been into games since I was a little kid. I remember some of my favorite experiences as a kid was receiving a board game for my birthday or for Christmas. And that high was always tempered shortly after by opening it and playing it, because I was always disappointed in the games that I got as a kid. So what I did is I would just try to change them and make them better and make them more fun for myself. And I never stopped doing that. So I got into it as a hobby in high school and college and really wanted to see if I could create my own game. I never dreamed of being a full-time game designer. That was sort of like being an astronaut, not something you really thought you could do. I printed off my first game, 200 copies off an inkjet printer, and I packed them up and I shipped them to Germany and went to a trade show there. Had no idea what I was doing and lost a lot of money, but I met a lot of people and had some great experiences. And it wasn't until 2008 when Pandemic came out, my first published game, that really doors started opening up to me, because that game just kind of took off.
Yeah, well, it just speaks to the fact that pandemics are absolutely in our world, for better or for worse, and everyone's talking about them. And I think everyone's still talking about your game.
Wait, so Matt, Pandemic was your first published game?
Yeah, I don't count the one that came off my printer. It doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. But yeah, I started working on Pandemic in around 2004.
Okay.
And it came out in 2008. So it took me roughly 3 years to design, and then another year with the publisher. Yeah, it was sort of a sleeper hit. It started to pick up some sales, and then they were reprinting it, and then it kind of took on a life of its own.
That's a pretty incredible board game debut. It's like one of the most successful board games, I feel like, of all time. So that's pretty impressive. Well done, Matt.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, thanks.
So what made you want to create a pandemic-related game? That seems pretty niche. What got you into that?
It was really a confluence of a lot of different things, I think. So I had played my first cooperative game because I didn't think cooperative games could be fun, honestly. I thought they were something, some educational tool that you play at school and really kind of hate a little bit. But I played one in 2000 with my wife, and what we noticed was that we really enjoyed the game, whether we won or lost. And this was really in stark contrast with some other games that I played with her, where, it'd be like a heavy competitive game or negotiation game where I might win the game but feel terrible at the end because, sometimes the feelings that you create in the game like bleed over into the real world. But that didn't happen with cooperative games. Even if we lost, we really enjoyed it. So I thought, wow, this is an amazing format. I want to see if I can design a game kind of like that. And around 2004, SARS was very much in the news. And so that was kind of percolating. And I've always been really interested in like chain reactions and cellular automata and, like emergent behaviors and systems design and so on. And so I think all of those kind of things came together. And I started just kind of sketching out some ideas on a big piece of newsprint with a Sharpie. And that's sort of what led to the genesis of it. But it was just a lot of iteration on it. I caught onto some mechanism pretty early on where I could see how the disease building up in intensity could be very scary. And I felt my heart kind of beating a little fast when I'm just sitting here with a piece of newsprint and some like little wooden cubes. And I thought, this is something. And so I built a whole game around that.
I love that focus too on cooperation. Monopoly has like broken up some families. So this is good. This is a game where people can come together and not be angry afterward.
If only we could
Yeah,
get that
exactly.
into the actual approach of pandemic preparedness and response. A little more cooperation might do us all a bit of good. So could you tell us what the process looked like for creating Pandemic? So, and by creating Pandemic, of course, I mean creating the game Pandemic. Did you did you have any input from subject matter experts? Did you do your own research? What does that creative process look like?
Well, I trained as a graphic designer and then a user experience designer. And so a lot of what I was focused on was really the play experience and like how accessible and how learnable the game was and how exciting it was. I think I had some background knowledge. I mean, I had read The Hot Zone by Richard Preston, which I think is about Marburg or Ebola, one of the two. And that scared the crap out of me.
I think every single one of these calls has started with someone saying, well, I read The Hot Zone, and then.
Yeah, exactly. So that made it, there's certainly a lot of drama there. But it was mostly just pop culture, like 12 Monkeys, movies, things like that. I didn't go into it really with the feeling like, oh, I'm going to make this educational or that the veracity was really important. Honestly, this is my first game, right? So it was really like, hey, can I make a game that's fun and that people will want to play? But I was pretty happy that it did seem to hold up when I showed it to people. I think it was because it's a pretty high level game, right? You're not talking about the specifics of researching diseases. Your heroes, it's more of a cinematic journey. So yeah, but it wasn't like something where I dug deep into the research for this one.
When you look back, do you think, oh, I maybe should have done a little more research, or does that actually make it a little easier for people to play the game?
I think it may be a little bit easier to step into it because it's pretty high level. I don't have a whole lot of regrets about it. I think mostly because I have shown it to people who have played it, who have been in the field, and I think mostly they're just excited to be the hero of a game. There's so many games out there right now that have like a fantasy theme where you're fighting orcs or you're a business tycoon or something like that. And this is a new topic for people to, like if you're working at the CDC, for example, I had a friend of a friend who was actually, I think, in West Africa at one point, who had played the game, and mostly just excited that they had a game of their own, right? It wasn't they were actually appearing in this sort of media.
That's neat. And you mentioned 12 Monkeys, which I don't think was on our radar as a possible pop culture. So that may be a new episode for us. So thank you, Matt. But yeah, I was looking at your website and I saw there were like 12 or 13 different expansion packs for Pandemic. There's all these different iterations that you've created of it. And I guess I just wondered, how are those all different? And was your approach different for each of those? Or what has that process been like?
Yeah, the game has really blossomed out into a full line. I think there's maybe close to 20 different Pandemic products now. But you have to understand that Pandemic's like at least a couple things. On the one hand, it's like a world where you've got people who are running around cooperating and trying to take care of outbreaks and research cures and so on. But then there's also like the underlying game engine called the Pandemic system. And there's been a lot of games built on that. So when I first designed the game, actually, I didn't think it would be like robust enough or stable enough to create expansions. And I was really quite wrong. It was very flexible. So many of those games that you see are really, they use the board game's threat engine, as it were. So the game's got a way of like controlling an antagonist. In Pandemic, it's viruses, right? But there's other ones where I've used it in Fall of Rome to control the flow of barbarians into the Roman Empire, or in Rising Tide, where you're trying to hold back rising floodwaters in the Netherlands, or there's even a Star Wars version. That's probably the bulk of them. But I did 3 different expansions with a colleague of mine, Tom Lehman, for the base game, and those introduce another virulent strain. So there's one strain of the disease which is nastier that you have to keep control of. There's another one where there's a mutant virus that behaves a little bit differently, or a mutation. And then there's an expansion called In the Lab, where you actually collect samples out in the field and you try to sequence things. And to be honest with you, Tom did a little bit more of the research on that end. And mostly what we were trying to do is avoid any kind of howlers, things that were just so misrepresented that it would take people out of the play experience. But wanted to open up new ways of cooperating and new ways of solving puzzles together. So the lab challenge in particular gives you a totally new way to find cures to the disease by sequencing things. And so, we wanted to provide different ways to play, and at the same time, not push it too far and really, really misrepresent things.
Has there been any consideration of doing a COVID expansion pack, or do you think that would be no fun for anybody since we already lived it?
We really want to. I guess the way to put it would be maintain some sort of respectful distance from COVID for a while. The last thing I want to do is be seen as trying to capitalize on human suffering. That wasn't rely on my list of life goals. But that said, there is a potential for us to put out a new edition at some point. We do have some expansion material that uses the language that we're all familiar with, right? I mean, when I started working on the game, people didn't know what social distancing was. Masking was something you did when you're sanding, wood. It was something you did when you went to the grocery store. So, there's just so much more general awareness that we are able to take a lot of those concepts and package it up, and it kind of remains to be seen when we would release that. But that material is designed and available. So stay tuned. We'll see if that will come out at some point.
Yeah, Rachel and I have talked so much about how these words and the terminology, this sort of lexicon that we used to just use almost exclusively professionally, right? That it was public health workforce was using it, or healthcare workforce was using it, has really entered the public lexicon, and the public has a much broader understanding of infectious disease threats, infectious disease and pandemic mitigation and response. And it must, I'm sure it makes your work both easier and harder on the game, right? Because especially with how political things in the pandemic got, I'm sure, the way people react to the game has just grown immensely, the various reactions people can have when they play.
Yeah, that's for sure. I saw 2 different big reactions when COVID hit. One was, oh my God, I'm living this. I don't need to play a game about it, right? If you're playing games to escape, then this was not necessarily the one for you. But then on the flip side, there were a lot of people who played it as a way to kind of take control, have a sense of autonomy. They could actually actively fight against it and feel good about that. So very, very different kinds of reactions to it.
Yeah, and I know you saw a surge in popularity during COVID-19 of the game. So can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like for you?
Yeah, it was really quite disorienting. To me, pandemics were something that happened to other people in other parts of the world. By definition, they're the whole world. But my experience with reading the material around SARS and swine flu and so on in the early part of the 2000s was one of being remote. But when COVID hit, it was, I guess, it'd be early 2020. Santa Clara County, where we live, was one of the first counties that was infected, and my wife actually contracted it extremely early. It was either late January or late February, and she had a real bad case, So we're dealing with that, and also just seeing this topic that I've been kind of adjacent to for so long, being so newsworthy, and then there was a lot of media attention as well. So I ended up doing a op-ed for the New York Times even about the game. And what was great about the game is that it's a cooperative experience where you're all coming together to fight the disease, and it emphasizes themes of cooperation and coordination and communication and that sort of thing. And it wasn't one where you're the virus trying to wipe out humanity. I think it would have been a lot harder for me to do any kind of interviews or talk about the game much if it was the other way. But I did like how the game was actually talking about those things, that seems so critically important, especially in the early days.
Well, I mean, no matter how people feel about actual pandemics, it's clear that the game is incredibly popular. Have you received feedback from people who are working in the field of infectious disease or pandemic response on the game? What has it been like?
The feedback has been almost universally positive. With one exception, we came out with 3 games called Pandemic Legacy, and they're like story-driven games, and they're really big boxes. And the big box needed to be illustrated, and the illustrator was covering it with lots of, quote, sciencey things. And one of the textures that was employed was like these, I think it was like a molecular structure diagram, and it had these carbon bonds, and the bonds are drawn incorrectly, and that really got on a lot of people's nerves. So the only threads I've seen online about complaints about the science in the game have been about those the representation of those chemical bonds on the box cover.
So not even your fault, right?
Well, Matt, I can tell you, I have been at honestly multiple public health meetings where we have played your game. Many times it's been like the decompress activity will play Pandemic, that was definitely pre-COVID. I think post-COVID, maybe people were like, oh, we're playing this in real life right now. But yeah, so it has been well received among the people I've worked with. But I also should admit that pre-COVID, I played some of those games that were more focused on creating the deadliest pathogen possible and wiping out humanity. After COVID, not so much. But you touched on this, how you wanted your game to be more collaborative and more positive than that. So I guess tell us a little bit more about that choice and what you think is the benefit of taking that approach.
Yeah, I'm not sure that choice was really conscious at the beginning. I think some of it comes out of it being a cooperative game. But when we were developing the game, I was working with a publisher. It's a very small company at the time. He commissioned a cover painting, and the painter sent in some sketches of what it should look like. And I just had this really immediate negative visceral reaction to the first sketch, which showed like mayhem, like lots of people in suits running around, and fires and things that look like they might have been a pile of burning bodies, just really scary stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, no, that's not what this game is about. And, I wasn't used to art directing game covers, but I'm like, I want to see the team first and foremost on the front. I want it to show the global scale. And I want, there's got to be a diverse cast. And can we get a female scientist front and center? And then, got those sketches back. And then with the second edition, they took it even further. And it's just wonderful to see, because it really captures what the game is about. It's about like a multidisciplinary team working together on a problem that's bigger than any one of them. And so it was only when I saw that picture and had something to react to that I really understood what the game was, what the emotions of the game were and what the purpose of it was.
Yeah, when you said that you were surprised that people were coming home from their day jobs of fighting the pandemic to play your game Pandemic. To me, I think that cooperative piece that you were just describing and that sort of vision for what it could be like was probably pretty cathartic, and something that you're not getting in your day job in the early days of fighting the pandemic. So maybe you come home and you find a better place within the board game to see what it could be like.
Yeah, I think that feeling of like autonomy and control is really powerful and really energizing for people. So
yeah,
I would hope that it gave some folks some kind of release like that. That's great.
We're looking forward to the future. I know when we were going through your bio, we mentioned that you've got this new game, Daybreak, and that's focused more on climate change, which Lauren and I get pretty excited talking about climate change and health. And that's something that's come up a lot in this podcast, which we've been a little bit surprised by, I think. But tell us more about Daybreak. What led you to create that game and just a little bit more about the game?
Yeah, so where Pandemic, it was sort of like I wanted to create a game just because I wanted to create a game. And I wanted to explore doing a cooperative game. And it was just sort of an open brief. It was like, explore whatever. Daybreak was really different. I had been feeling a lot of like climate anxiety, didn't really understand the problem of climate change very well, was feeling really overwhelmed by it, and wondered, what can I do? I've had this game Pandemic about viruses. It's been successful. Can I do something about climate change? There's actually a climate scientist in Scotland who wrote to me and asked me to do a version of Pandemic centered on the climate crisis, saying, hey, we really got to do this. This is very important, and outline some ideas. And I read them, and I kind of almost immediately loved the idea of doing a cooperative game about climate change, but didn't think the Pandemic threat system was right for it. I thought it was too important, and it really in this case, really, the game should model what's going on. So when people play it, they understand the systems involved and what they can do and what the solutions are and so on. So I jumped into like researching the topic and spent some time with that. And while I was doing it, there's a person who wrote on Twitter about what pandemic taught us about the pandemic. We need something like this for climate change. Matteo Menapace, an Italian designer. I reached out to him and we started chatting, and we started having meetings, and pretty soon those meetings were weekly, and before long we were actually working on this game together that ultimately became Daybreak. And we went through this big trough of despair as we, read all the research around it, but ultimately started to find ways that we could model a solution in our reading. And it took us about 2 years to develop the game. And we did it in conjunction with a lot of the sources that we were referencing jumped on board to help us write content for the game. So we work with Project Drawdown and the Red Crescent Climate Center and a lot of other subject matter experts. So that was super rewarding. Our goals were, first and foremost, we want to create a game that's fun, because we didn't want people to, have to suffer through it or anything like that. We wanted people to be excited to play the game. But our other objective was really trying to get across a lot of the concepts, the solutions, and the stakes involved in the game just by playing it. So you play it, you have a lot of fun, but underneath it all, you're beginning to internalize all the dynamics of, what the stakes are and what the solutions are. And then we went even further. So if you're interested in any one of the cards, you can scan it on your phone, and it takes you to a really robust website where you can read all about the different solutions, whether they're policies or technologies, and then actually take action on them if you want to.
Matt, just hearing you talk through that process, one of the tools we use in preparedness and response pretty regularly to prioritize and plan and essentially identify gaps in our preparedness is running exercises. And it almost feels like these games are a really robust exercise that could actually be used for true planning purposes. Have you ever thought about the potential that this approach to problem solving could have in the actual environment where we're doing the work to find solutions to climate change, to try to stop pandemics, to try to respond to infectious disease threats? It seems like there's a natural connection there.
Yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, pandemic's been used in medical schools to teach communication and team building skills. In one case, in the University of Leicester Medical School, they actually graded people. They would sit them down, have them play Pandemic, actually rate them on all lots of different, basically code their behaviors, see what the performance was, communicate, deltas, how, what their behaviors are, how they could change, have them play again and see, behavior changes based on that, which is like this great laboratory way of like looking at how a medical team behaves in a simulation, as opposed to like showing a PowerPoint saying, hey, these behaviors are important. I mean, it's a very different kind of approach. And then when you're looking at Daybreak, it's even further. It's not just communication and collaboration skills. It's really like you learn so many things, not just the specific names of different solutions, but you learn about like the time value of money, opportunity cost, or the cost of early action versus like more efficient actions down the road after you've had some time to invest in them. You learn about the trade-offs between like doing a lot of mitigation or adaptation. You can learn how like if you pour all the money you have into adaptation, that's great, but you're not going to solve the problem. And it's all done just through simple game mechanisms. We're not trying to teach you that by reading a big long page. You just internalize it by playing the game. So yeah, I think it would be a really useful model. Maybe a high level model, mind you. We're not going to be teaching things to experts in these niches, but it's a pretty useful way to get across a big picture of what's going on.
So what I'm hearing is you want to come teach an MPH class at our college.
I see. So this podcast is a recruiting arm here.
All a giant trap. No, but that's great. I mean, I think, we always struggle with how to, when you're working with SMEs and they might have all of the technical knowledge, but not necessarily those soft skills that we need in the emergency response phase. No offense to any of our SMEs. People have different skills and capabilities, and oftentimes in emergencies, people are coming together for the first time in new teams, and they have different styles of working, they have different styles of problem solving, and maybe we need more technical experts sitting down and playing games together.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Well, Matt, what other new games do you have coming up? I'm almost thinking, as we were talking about this, I was thinking about how with climate change, we see an increase in vector-borne diseases, so potentially new pandemics. I'm thinking maybe a Daybreak pandemic crossover event. Just for thought. You get that one for free.
Well, I tell you, there is a pandemic card in Daybreak, so there's a little bit of a crossover there. Yeah. I don't have a Daybreak card in pandemic yet, but we'll see if we can work that in.
Well, what else is on the horizon? Any other expansion packs or all new things?
Well, this fall has been really big for me. We had the fourth game in the Forbidden series. That's Forbidden Island, Forbidden Desert, Forbidden Sky. Forbidden Jungle came out just recently, so that's been a lot of fun to see. And then I partnered up with the designer of Ticket to Ride to do a Ticket to Ride Legacy game, and also with Rob Davio, who I did the Pandemic Legacy series with. And then next year I'm venturing into the realm of dexterity games. So I've got like a skill and action game coming out, which is very different for me. And then a few other ones that I can't really talk about. But there's more coming.
I like it. Can you tell us, just because I don't know, what is a dexterity game?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So in this one, you're actually flicking little pieces across the table. There's no board involved, but there's like little toy-like components that you manipulate with your hands and take like little skill shots and so on.
That's cool.
So cool.
Yeah, it was fun to work on something. I don't know. It really takes advantage of the physical space, right? It's a board game, so why not really emphasize the toy-like nature of all the components? And that's been a lot of fun to work on in the garage.
I'm sure this isn't like asking a parent who their favorite child is, but do you have a favorite board game that you've created?
Oh, I guess my pat answer to that is whatever I'm currently working on is always the one I'm most interested in. Because after I'm done with them, I mean, they go on the shelf, and I may not play them for years and years afterward. But the one that I'm currently working on is always, that's the one that I'm crazy about.
That's not too different from writing a research grant. It's like the favorite one is the one you're working on, and then once you get it, you're like, put it on the shelf.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what about board games that you enjoy playing? Are there any that you like to play when you're not working on your own games?
Oh, yeah. They fall into two different categories, kind of depending on the groups of people I'm playing with. So there's a lot of like lighter party games. There's one called Just One, which is really approachable and easy to learn, where you have to come up with a single clue in order to get someone to guess an answer. And there's other games like Codenames and Decrypto, which I really love. In the more strategy space, I play a lot of games by Reiner Knizia, whether it's Tigris and Euphrates or Quest for El Dorado. There are so many games out there. I mean, I just came back from Germany, where the world's largest consumer trade show is every year. It's about 200,000 people getting together. And I don't know how many games there were. It's at least 1,000, maybe 1,200 or more new games just this year. So there's a lot out there.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. Anything else that you want us to know about Pandemic or Daybreak or anything else you have on the horizon?
Well, Daybreak is just going to backers right now. So we crowdfunded it, and all the people who ordered their copy should be getting them like within the week. So that's very exciting. And it should be in retail shortly after. So sometime, probably late November, you'll be able to find that. We are offering discounts for educators, so you can check that out if you're interested in that for your classes or for teaching anything. Yeah, I'm just excited to see this finally come out after, I think it's been like 3.5 years since we started on it. So it's been quite a marathon.
And can you tell us your website again where people can check that out?
Yeah, you can find out all about my games at leacock.com.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us today. This was an exciting new foray for pandemics and pop culture, but it sounds like we have a lot more pandemic-related board games on our horizon, at least playing them, even if we're not talking about them on the podcast. For those of you listening at home, thank you so much for tuning into this episode on Pandemic, the board game. We hope you'll join us for future episodes on a wide range of topics, from healthcare worker safety to personal protective equipment, and even more about infectious diseases of all kinds. If you have any questions for NETEC or ideas for future shows, please feel free to contact us at info@netec.org. That's info@netec.org. Or find us on the web at netec.org/podcast, where you can subscribe to future episodes and find more information on today's topic. We will see you next time on Transmission Interrupted.
You've been listening to Transmission Interrupted, the podcast series from NETEC, the National Emerging Special Pathogens Training and Education Center. Learn more at netec.org.